Speaker, Michael Geller. Michael's a Vancouver architect, planner, and real estate consultant, developer, and writer. He's also an adjunct professor at the SFU Centre for Sustainability Community Development, and he has served as a director of the Canada Green Building Council and is a frequent commenter on urban issues across Canada. I'd like to invite Michael now to speak to us on the sustainable experience and 25 years on what we've learned.
Thank you. But you forgot to mention the last line of my introduction, which is you can say whatever you want about me as long as it's not true. I'm happy to be here. I think Mr. Smed was a very good act to try and follow, and I'm looking forward to it. So let's get on with this. I am not an environmentalist. I came to Vancouver in 1974, and here I am, and I joined CMHC. So these are my credentials for today's talk. Like most of you, I've smoked a little dope in the past, but I never wore Birkenstocks. I was never described as a tree hugger. And my first environmental project was while with CMHC. Some of you may recognize this on West Broadway. And I can remember Jacques Curry, who was then the Inner City Housing Co-op, phoning me at home on the weekend, begging me to take a chance on him in this project. And it was, in its time, very, very environmentally advanced. I was the project manager for the Spetafor lands, and I think the environmental movement was formed about halfway through our 27 nights of public hearing, and helped give me a new perspective. I went up to SFU and was profiled in, I think it was called Shared Image magazine, that became today's Woman magazine, and they called me the accidental environmentalist. I like that title because I think it fits. So what I want to do is quickly chat with you about the fact that you are in the greenest city in the world, or what certainly some people want to be the greenest city in the world. I'd like to talk a bit about LEED, look at different types of projects, touch on this whole notion of the ecological footprint that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, a few thoughts of others and what they're doing, which we can learn from, and some conclusions. But I'm sure you're all aware that, and it's not just Mayor Gregor. When Peter Ladner was on City Council in Vancouver, and indeed, when Bose was the mayor of Surrey many years ago, there was an interest in Vancouver becoming part of the whole Cascadian movement towards becoming a more environmentally sustainable region. And but certainly there's no doubt that the mayor has advanced this cause, and I think rightly so. I have no problem with us trying to be the greenest city in the world, as long as we appreciate we probably never will be, because it's not in our psyche. I mean, we don't, any of you spend any time in Europe, no, we are nowhere near where most people are when it comes to understanding how to conserve resources or minimize waste and so forth, and I'll touch on it. But we're striving. Some of the things that are being set out as targets, we're not yet achieving, but I think ultimately we may well achieve many of them. I don't know how many of you had a chance to go to Greenest City Camp, but I guess you have to at some point if you want to be part of the movement. And of course, this whole notion of Talk Green to us, I think, is certainly heightening awareness. Over the years, I've become quite interested in what some refer to as green streets, green roofs, and now green walls. Just out of interest, can any of you identify any of these pictures? Does anybody know where that top one is? This is an experimental street in the city of Vancouver. It's in the Southlands area. And it was designed with an alternative approach to parking the car, stormwater management, and so forth. And indeed, we're slowly moving back. The green roof in the middle is on the cornerstone building at Simon Fraser University, which was the, if any of you know SFU, daily you go to SFU.
Works there.
So if you go up there, then you know Cornerstone, and you recognize that green wall too. That's in the one of the new universities. Well, it's not so new now. One of the things that certainly we are doing, I think, in an effort to become a more sustainable city, is think about our ways of getting around. And I'm always kind of intrigued with the conversation that goes on. People who I think are perfectly normal people now spend their time counting bikes on Burrard Street Bridge. And if the scheme on the top gets approved, they'll get a chance to count the bikes on the Granville Street Bridge. But there's no doubt that this whole question of alternative transportation is something that causes a great deal of concern. In 2007, I took the year off and went around the world and wrote a column in the Sun. And after visiting a number of cities, did write about how we needed to make Vancouver a more bike-friendly and safer city. And I think it is happening. I think the concern, though, is perhaps too much money is being spent in some of the bike lanes, and less expensive solutions might have been more appropriate. I prepared this presentation before I knew that Suzuki was going to be chatting with you, but I do feel that he still very much has experience and he does have influence. But in a way, we've kind of caught up. I mean, for many years, he was really the only person promoting, preaching a lot of the ideas that today are becoming commonplace. And a number of years ago, I read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, after attending a conference like that. And if you haven't read it, even though it's an old book, I think you should read it, because I think it's a wonderful perspective on how ideas gain currency. Whether it's what Mr. Smet was talking about before in terms of new approaches to building, most of which I fully agree with, or whether it's just new attitudes towards resource management. I had an opportunity to have some intimate contact with Mr. Suzuki when I attended a conference a number of years ago by part of the Smart Growth movement in America, and I looked at the program and there were so many doctors speaking, and I made a joke about all these pretentious academics who like to be called doctor. And when I got there, I realized I was wrong. These weren't pretentious academics at all. They were real doctors. My academic friends take great offense at that. But they were medical doctors, and the whole conference was looking at the correlation between good planning and good health. And to be honest, even though I was well aware that zoning was initially created to enhance health, I never really thought about the correlation. But of course, when we think about it, those suburbs that we saw in the last presentation, where you really drive everywhere because they're not walkable, the people in there really are more obese than the people who live in environments where they want to walk. And I came back and talked about this as being one of the goals that we were going to try to achieve at SFU University. And indeed, Suzuki did a segment of this, of his Nature of Things called The Weight of the World, which looked at how SFU was trying to do it. And I think we succeeded. But today, people like Larry Frank and many others are promoting this idea of how well-planned, walkable communities actually do result in people who are healthier. I was at a presentation in Toronto a number of years ago, and their Mayor Miller was introduced the term for the first time, green-collar jobs. I'd never heard of it before. What he was talking about, how Toronto was going to retrofit many of its high-rise buildings that had been built in the 60s and 70s that were energy hogs to make them both more environmentally sustainable and also to create green-collar jobs. And it's an idea that I like, and indeed, soon all of us may be involved in what are deemed green-collar jobs. So I don't think a day goes by now when I don't hear the word sustainable and when I hear the word LEED. And although most people still call it LEEDs for reasons I've never fully understood. So let's chat a little bit about LEEDs here. Even when I'm talking to, regardless of the audience, I still think the jury is out in terms of whether LEED really is the most appropriate certification system to be used in North America. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that over the years it has become more responsive, in part by fragmenting itself into everything from LEED for individual single-family homes to LEED for entire communities. But I have had direct experience with LEED, and I'm sure many of you have, and I am going to try and leave plenty of time so we can talk a bit about this. But certainly, I have concerns with the costs that are often associated with certification, the time, and the frustration that often comes with it. The other thing is, I actually support what LEED was intended to do. What I don't support is how it has often been used. The City of Vancouver for a while said, we will only rezone your project if it meets LEED Gold certification. And I remember asking the senior city planner, so if after the building's finished and it's commissioned and it doesn't meet LEED certification, does that mean the people on the top 4 floors have to move out? Think about it. So, there's no doubt, I got this statistic, I'm sure it's true, I found it on the internet. 1.5 million square feet of space is certified every day. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's no doubt. Certainly most buildings, I suspect many of the buildings, if not all that you're involved with, are involved in some kind of green certification. There's no doubt that if you're doing commercial buildings now, it's become almost essential. I don't think anybody would do an office building in downtown Vancouver, and this is a case in point, that doesn't have a LEED standard. And especially in the city of Vancouver, because if it doesn't, you probably will get your application put at the bottom of the pile. LEED Gold is pretty much the standard, and of course every once in a while, especially if it's a rezoning, somebody is seeking out LEED Platinum. For a number of years I was involved with the expansion of the Vancouver Trade and Convention Center. There was no discussion there. It had to be LEED, and it didn't matter what the certification was because most of the people booking conferences didn't know the difference between gold, silver, platinum, or certified, but it had to be certified, and it is. And it's doing something that we tried to do at SFU. If you've got it, flaunt it. And so that big green roof says to every conference planner in the world, we are a really sustainable building. And indeed, there's some nice stories about that roof too. My friend Alan Garr, I think, has some bees up there. But there are the other side of the coin. As you can tell, I have not drunk all the Kool-Aid. And indeed, when somebody sends me an email with a message that one of the LEED Platinum buildings in the States indeed has not achieved the standard, I think we should pay attention to that. We shouldn't just simply accept that LEED is a wonderful thing and LEED Platinum is something. Indeed, I tell all my clients, you know, I really want us to be very, very careful if your goal is to do something that's LEED Platinum. When it comes to residential, it's taking a lot longer to catch on. One of the first LEED buildings that I recall in Metro Vancouver was in North Vancouver called the Silva. Robert Brown, who a very thoughtful fellow with a mixed background, was involved with it. And I think it did, in fact, get a little bit of promotion and profile because it was, I think, the first LEED Silver apartment condominium in Vancouver. There's a lot more, and indeed many more. The problem, of course, is this whole question of, is it going to be certified, or does it have to be a LEED equivalent? If you don't know the difference, we'll talk about it in the Q&A. But one of the interesting things is whenever Peter Busby, or people like Peter, gets up and tells a large audience that LEED buildings do not cost more or need not cost more, I disagree. I think invariably, especially when they're residential, they do cost more. Now, there's reasons why they cost more, and they'll be lower cost to operate, but invariably, if you're building a LEED residential project, it costs more than if it doesn't have to be LEED. And I know I've been involved with a lot of them, but that's not to say that often it's well worth the additional cost. What I'm not convinced of is that bottom blue triangle, whether it's worth the registration and application fees and all of the various blue LEED documentation costs. But we can talk about that. Hopefully there's at least a few people here who disagree with me and will challenge me. So now the question is, why do they cost more? Well, read this. I hate people who do PowerPoint presentations and read the words on the slide, but it's important for you to read this because otherwise the next slides won't have any real significance. Now what I'm about to show you is a disgusting term of phrase, but it'll hopefully make sure that you never forget this idea. So I think it's true that they take a normal building and then they add on everything, rather than stopping and saying, do we really need such big windows? Or should we not think a little bit more about the orientation? Or maybe we shouldn't even be building it here, we should build it where there's a bus and so forth. So I think there's an important idea there that you really do need to rethink, and people use terms like integrated design and so forth. You really do need to rethink how you approach buildings where you are striving to achieve a higher level of sustainability. So I spent 7 years at SFU. I'm very proud of what we did. I'll be absolutely honest. The only reason we did strive to create a more sustainable community is because, one, I thought it was fitting for a university to be involved in a real estate development that was going to be ultimately seen to be as a more sustainable model form of development. I thought it would help me with the approval process, particularly with students and others affiliated with the university. And the other thing was, I actually thought it might help us get a bit of a marketing cachet, just like the Silva did a number of years earlier, because we really did not have as good a site to market housing as, say, the University of British Columbia. And I'm not going to talk very much about it, but we did do a number of things up there that I think are worth talking about. The first community transit pass, where residents were able to buy a $28 a month 3-zone transit pass. Ideas, when residents moved in, we gave them pedometers instead of a champagne bucket, and things like that, just to reinforce it. But a lot of the green projects have failed, at least in my opinion, to some degree. The first one is Dockside Green. It's beautiful to look at. Van City, which I see as one of the sponsors here, I don't know if there's anybody here from Van City, but I know they've lost a lot of money on it. Now they've hired, I think, a good person to try and reposition it and bring it back. But it's because there was too much, I like that last bit about, the environment versus the economy. In that case, there was too much focus on the environment and not enough focus on the economy, and I think it's failed. It's not the only one. Olympic Village has been in the news a lot lately. As far as I'm concerned, from a financial point of view, notwithstanding the mayor telling us all the other day that the city has not lost a cent because he promised we wouldn't lose a cent, the city's losing a lot of money on this. Now again, over time it may not matter, but we are losing money because a lot of the things that were done here not only have cost a lot more money than they should have, they didn't always work. As you know, the goal very early on was to create the greenest city, the greenest community and the greenest city in Canada. That community center started off at $23 million, it ended up at $36 million, but it's a LEED Platinum community center. This is one of the seniors projects that was determined to become a net zero building. The social housing had a budget of $65 million, and it came in at just over $110 million, and it's still being subsidized by you and me for social housing tenants. And the first 84 units were written down because no one wanted to take them on as an ongoing living environment. The city can still not find another nonprofit to take over the remaining social housing units because they don't want to incur the responsibility for maintaining many of the environmental features and many of the design features that came with those buildings. To my mind, that means it's not working. I think the shoreline is beautiful, and some of the parks, and that is lovely, and it is something to celebrate. The notion of growing on the roofs is something that we can debate. It's a neat idea, urban agriculture, but I'd rather see it done on a lot of those large industrial buildings in Richmond rather than over someone's penthouse apartment, especially those people who go up there with pitchforks. The district energy system, I think, is very interesting. I don't know how much you know about it, but I'm told it's working. It's an interesting idea. And it got the LEED Platinum neighborhood plaque. But as we know, notwithstanding that, it had difficulties. This is history now, you know it. Millennium eventually lost it, rebranded. But what I think is interesting is the fact that all of the energy-saving features ended up costing the residents more money than if they didn't have the energy-saving features. And I think we should pay attention to that, because we need to make sure we don't do it again. Indeed, some of the monitoring systems were costing people far more than the money they were saving. But Bob Rennie and others felt it was important for people to have these little monitoring devices because it was kind of sexy. It's like the dashboard in my new Tesla. You know, it's just so sexy. Whether or not it means that I might run out of electricity on the highway one day is beside the point. So over the years, people speculated how much the city might lose. And I do directly believe a large part of this was because of this goal of setting out to be the greenest city in the world. But hopefully all those problems will be worked out and problems will be forgotten, because there's no doubt it is a wonderful new waterfront community. And I say that because in 1974, when I was wearing that ridiculous jacket, I was appointed the project manager for the original development on the south shore of False Creek. So I'm pleased to see the whole area slowly being finished. So at SFU, we did an initiative with the Dutch government on looking at different ideas about sustainability. And a fellow was invited to speak to us, and this is a quote from his presentation. I think you can all see it. So who do you think said this? Obviously not me. It was the founder of the concept of the ecological footprint, Bill Reese at UBC. He was a very impressive guy. And what he was saying is he too is concerned that while we've made great strides when it comes to awareness, everybody uses the word sustainable, we're so full of greenwashing. I wanted to make sure you appreciated that I understand the importance of that. I'm wearing my green socks. You all noticed my green tie, so I must be a green guy, right? And our communities are all green because we tell people they are. But I get offended, as does Bill Reese, when I see there's a new Walmart that's got a LEED certification and you can't get to it unless you drive a car. It's preposterous. Similarly, it's changing, but the jobs housing balance, which is so important if we want to cut back on the amount that people travel, is really not significantly different than it was 20 years ago. Now it's starting to change in Burnaby, interestingly enough, where a lot of new development is taking place, especially around the transit stations, and the number of business licenses is increasing. Ironically, and sadly, the city of Vancouver has actually seen a reduction in the number of business licenses in recent years, because so many of the businesses have been replaced by sustainable residential developments, and people now drive to Langley to get to work. I know, this is a real cheap shot. By the way, that's not Photoshop. That's my club. That's the Arbutus Club. And God only knows what that person was trying to do. But the point is, parking is, to my mind, one of the most significant topics when it comes to talking about how we live, and also about housing affordability. It's sort of a side issue, but I give a talk on how to create more affordable housing. Number one idea is to reduce parking standards, to think more about shared cars, because if we significantly can reduce parking standards, it opens up so many opportunities. We can start building in all those parking lots and shopping centers, church parking lots and so forth. And you can also then begin to reduce the cost, because any of you who've ever built, been involved in development, depending on how many levels you're going down and the constriction of the site and how much ramping, and God forbid you'll never design a parking garage like the one under this building, but it costs a lot of money. This is something I thought about one day when I was doing one of these presentations. I was about to give a talk on sustainability, and of course the water is running. I've got the water running in the shower, so it'll be nice and hot when I get in. And I thought, you know, it's not right. Like, you could do so much if you just turned off the water while you're brushing your teeth. And you didn't keep the water, you know, you accept the water might be a little cooler in the shower, or you told the builder next time wrap the pipes with insulation, or go to a more efficient instant heating system, which I've been doing in my last few projects. But again, it's just this little notion. One thing I do kind of disagree with Mr. Smed when he said everything has been invented. Just think how long it took before they started to put luggage, wheels on luggage. That's right. Not everything has been invented. And so there are a lot of things that are about to be invented, but there's also a lot of things that we used to do that we should start doing again. Like, we shouldn't keep the water running. We should turn the lights off. I told Mr. Smed he has to stop with the marriage jokes and the girlfriend jokes. It might have been too much of the owner of a basketball team. This is a reality. I'll bet you, I live in a house. I mean, my wife keeps saying, should we have Fortis come in and do a testing? I said, no, because they'll use my house as a poster child for what not to do. I mean, I think we have about 12 sets of French doors, and they all leak, and I know they leak. But it isn't that responsible. I know it. So, this is a picture I took in the basement of a new stacked townhouse development. Brent Totteran, the then director of planning, and his staff made the developer do this so he could get his rezoning. And what this is a system that was put in part, those big tanks, because they were concerned about they wanted the building to be more energy efficient, and they were all stacked townhouses, and they couldn't use electric heat, so they then ended up with this very convoluted set of ducts and pipes and so forth. He also wanted a lot of sprinklers everywhere, even though every unit had a door to the outside. But the water pressure in the area was not sufficient to support the sprinklers in the event of a fire, so they made them build a reservoir in the basement of the apartment complex. And to my mind, we do this sort of thing too often. Like, sometimes you just have to stop and say, as Edward de Bono, the founder of Gladwell thinking, said, you know, sometimes you have to stop digging the hole deeper and deeper and step back and say, maybe I should either start digging another hole or do something else. One of the topics that's very au courant these days is district energy. And you know, in theory, it seems like a very good idea. It's a great idea if you're in a situation like SFU, where you could do cogeneration and take the heat off of the university buildings and use it to heat the houses and so forth. But we're not really doing that. And indeed, many of the problems we have right now is we're not yet ready with alternative fuel sources to run these district energy systems, so we have a kind of a belt and suspenders approach. And I feature my friend Norm Cody, who used to work for me, because he's been one of the few people to say, just a second. And indeed, I even got an email yesterday from Roger Bailey, who was very involved in the whole Olympic Village and the energy district system there, to say, we're actually creating systems that are more expensive to operate and actually are less efficient than if we just gave everybody an electric baseboard heater with an individual thermostat. And here's one of the reasons why I think this is a problem, and it has to do with individual metering. And I'm going to prove to you that if you don't have individual metering, you're going to spend more. And the way I'm going to prove it to you is to remind you the last time you went out to dinner with some friends or a birthday party or in the office, and just before you were about to order, somebody said, should we have individual bills or shall we split it up? And one of the people says, we'll just split it up. And you think, well, if we're splitting it up, I know that he's going to have the lobster followed by the steak, so I may as well have the lobster and the steak and the shrimp cocktail and a nice bottle of wine, because we're just going to split it up. And instead of it being an $18 dinner, everybody's looking at $63 plus the wine and wondering, how did that happen? And that's what happens in apartment buildings that don't have individual heating, because you think you're going to let somebody else pay for the heat in your building. And that's part of the problem we have, and I think it's part of the thing that we have to change. So ironically, while we're striving to be the greenest city in the world, our ecological footprint is actually not much different than it was before. So just a few thoughts. I mean, this is just for general information. But I have learned there's a lot. There's probably over 30 different certification systems around the world, and in addition to LEED. I like the Dutch. I got a chance to go and look at the Dutch Sustainable Network and some of their ideas 2 years ago. I don't know if anybody here is Dutch, but the Dutch have a entirely different approach. I mean, remember, they started with windmills, right? They understood alternative energy source. Ironically, though, the government was subsidizing the construction of these new big windmills until they realized they're not cost effective, and they've actually stopped funding them. I like the Australians. Australians are sustainable, not because they want to be the greenest city in the world or country in the world. They have to be. They don't have enough water. And indeed, real issues down there just in terms of actually having enough water. And we're starting to see that in other places. If any of you have been in California recently, usually at the bottom of page 17, there's a little story about the fact that the community is running out of water. This is, you can't see this, but this is the Urban Development Institute of Australia that's actually developed its own code and its own set of building standards and environmental certification, because all of the local developers were involved in the organization and they're subscribing to it. And they're actually doing some very good things. This past year I went to Germany for a month because I thought, let's go and see some real innovations, and I went to Freiburg. And Freiburg probably is one of the greenest cities in the world. But I have some advice. If any of you want to now go to Freiburg, please don't do what I did. I went to Freiburg to see the greenest city in the world, and I booked a hotel in Freiburg. And when I got there and I asked the fellow at the train station if I could walk to the hotel or whether I needed a taxi, he said, I don't know. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I've never heard of this hotel. And I said, well, here's the address. Oh, he said, that's in Freiburg with an E. You're in Freiburg with a U. I said, there's 2 Freiburgs in Germany? He said, yes. I said, don't other people get confused? Yes, he said, all the time. But anyway, I did find the Green City Hotel in Freiburg. I saw this truck pulling up to someone's house. I thought, my God, it reminds me of the big oil truck they used to pull up to my parents' house, which I feel I can smell oil or gas in this room. But anyway, hopefully we'll live to at least the end of my talk, if not the next one. But, and there they are in the bottom right. They're retrofitting one of their existing high-rises to make it the greenest high-rise retrofit in the world. But I like that picture on the left. I mean, I worked hard to get the panels on the building to match the color of the train cars. So,
do you mind if I ask, before you get away too far away from Freiburg, how far were the 2 cities from each other?
they're a long way. One is in East Germany, near Dresden, and the other's right in the southwest corner of the country. So I got a different hotel. So we're learning, there's a lot, we talked before about, I mean, we all learn from different places, and I love traveling, and I love looking at what's going on. One of the things that surprised me is that there's a lot to learn from China. And indeed, China's been in the news a lot. It's going to continue to be in the news a lot. I went to, and I can recommend this, I went to the Expo 2010 in Shanghai. And I mean, it was a showcase of innovation in so many respects. And then 2 years later, I went to Yasu. And the next World Fair, I think, is in Milan. And if you've never been to a World Fair, you really should go. Don't worry about how much it costs. It's worth it. And it's worth it because you see wonderful ideas. I mean, a bit like some of the things we saw in the last presentation. We have our condo king. I met somebody who worked for this guy. He's known as the Solar King now. I've been told that since this was done, he's gone broke. But a representative of his company told me, I said, are you a big company? She said, we manufacture more solar power panels in our operation than all the countries of the European community combined. You can actually see a garbage can with the colored lights flashing as it's compacting the garbage. On top of Burnaby Mountain on a cloudy day, you then begin to mix it real. The other thing I thought was, even if it doesn't work, it'll be a great piece of public art. What I didn't know is Van City orchestrated a press release and a little press conference as we set this new garbage can in our main square. And if you Google University and Michael Geller, more often than not, all of the media attention that was given to our garbage can comes up. I got up 5 o'clock in the morning to be on Canada AM to talk about our garbage can because it's what some people refer to as a sticky idea. It's an idea that people can relate to, like container housing. Anyway, let me finish off. But just some of the innovations in China, go there and see it, it's worth it. Some of these things they've actually built. I mean, so often I see pictures of things and I discover. I went here, this is a town which is a copy of Germany. You know, we take a couple of ideas. They actually have built a whole town that's a copy of a German town. Unfortunately, the construction is not as good as the German construction. Have any of you heard or been to Masdar? So this is in United Arab Emirates. And again, a whole model community. And they're doing some very interesting things. These are renderings of ideas. But some of these things they are doing, including buildings with windmills that go up on the outside. So, have we made progress in the last 20 or 25 years? Yes, without a doubt, without a doubt. Have we got everywhere we wanted to go? Absolutely not. In some areas, I'm not sure we're that much further ahead. But I think my message, if there is one, is that there's nothing wrong with trying to balance and think about those 3 legs of the sustainability stool. It isn't just all about the environment. The economic sustainability is important too, just like social sustainability. And if Mike Harker was with me, he'd say, Geller, don't forget about cultural sustainability. Or if I'm at SFU, I talk about educational sustainability. But I think that it's reasonable that we seek out more proof that what we're doing is really working. And we can do it. Just, you know, to the point of starting to have monitors and regular reports and so forth. Rather than just spending the money and getting the plaque and putting it on the outside of the building and then running the water and leaving the lights on. There are so many new products coming out in this field. I don't need to tell you about this. And magazines that present them, and conferences that promote them. And Globe, I go to Globe every year, and it's fascinating to see the latest products that are coming forward. But I think with that, I am going to stop. I put this up because they say authors have endings and architects have exits. So with that, hopefully we got a little time for conversation. Thank you very much.